The South African passport is getting even weaker in 2026, and one wonders whether the ANC's foreign policy isn't to blame. Let's get into this shocking story. So for many South Africans who enjoy traveling, it's no secret that travel on a South African passport is quite difficult. After all, it's a fairly weak passport and visas are required to travel to many parts of the globe. But if one thought that travel in 2025 was difficult, it's only gotten increasingly challenging in 2026, with even more countries deciding to make travel for South Africans that much harder. But before we get into the story, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's entirely free and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below the video. Furthermore, if you would like to support the channel and enjoy some additional perks, consider becoming a Power Club member. You can do so by clicking on the join button below. Now let's get into it. So for many South Africans, Republic of Ireland was one of the few Western developed countries where they could travel without having to apply for a visa. And this was very beneficial. In fact, in the entirety of Europe, it was only the Republic of Ireland and Russia where South Africans could travel without having to apply for a visa first. And as we know, that was very beneficial because visas can be incredibly expensive and time-consuming to get. And so just to remind us, here was the press release where it explained that with effect from 10th of July 2024, holders of South African and Botswanan passports will be subject to Irish visa requirements, which means that they will need to obtain an Irish visa before traveling to Ireland. But this wasn't the only developed country to make life harder for South Africans in recent times. So another developed country where South Africans now need a visa in order to travel to is Israel. So although there has been a lot of tension between the two countries, especially since the ICJ case, Israel was actually a visa-free country for South African passport holders in the past. In fact, many South Africans, both Jewish and non-Jewish alike, were able to travel to Israel fairly easily because after all that Israel would do is they would ensure that their border security would vet the passengers who come through in order to determine whether or not they're safe to enter the country. And so it was an appealing holiday destination for many people due to there not being these visa requirements. However, at the beginning of 2025, all that changed. And as explained in this press release, please be informed that according to the information received by the Population and Immigration Authority, as of the 1st of January 2025, nationals of visa-exempt countries must have an ETA-IL approval prior to their flight to Israel. So what this means is that you have to go to the government website. You only have to pay 25 Israeli shekels, which is less than $7. And you'll receive an email notification when PIBA receives your request, and then eventually you'll be granted approval to enter the country. So obviously this is done to speed up the process, but what one needs to remember is that even though South Africa isn't the only country affected, it does kind of make sense that South Africa would be affected because after all, the ANC decided to take a highly hostile stance against Israel. And so Israel can't be blamed when thinking that there could be dangerous people in South Africa who want to travel for nefarious reasons. However, in 2026, there are now 5 countries that have decided to impose fresh visa requirements on South African passport holders. So this Business Tech article explains how the South African passport only seems to be getting weaker and weaker. And as explained here, South Africans are now able to travel to 101 countries without a visa. However, this marks a decline from 106 visa-free destinations in the previous year. As a result, South Africa's passport has slipped to 48th place globally in the 2026 rankings, and these are the Henley Passport Index rankings, placing it between Qatar and Belize. While this position keeps South Africa firmly in the middle of the global rankings, it highlights a widening gap between the South Africans and holders of the world's strongest passports. Singapore once again tops the index, with its citizens enjoying visa-free access to 192 destinations. And so just take that into consideration for a moment. Singapore has visa-free access to 192 destinations. South African passport holders only 101. So it's almost half of what Singaporeans are able to go to visa-free. So here it explains that the countries where South Africa has lost its visa-free access are Mauritania and Nigeria in Africa, Pakistan in Asia, Kosovo in Europe, and Palestine in the Middle East, which of course is pretty ironic given how the ANC is trying to improve its relations with Palestine all the time while attacking Israel. Yet, both countries view South Africans with skepticism. Now, one might ask, well, what exactly is the reason for all of these countries deciding to impose stricter visa restrictions on South Africa? And the answer is quite simple. You see, countries determine their entry requirements according to two things primarily. One is the health of their bilateral relations with the other country, and two is the sort of risks that people from that country pose. Now, unfortunately, the ANC has decided to make South Africa an international pariah, especially against Israel and the West. And so those countries are not going to view South Africa in a favorable light. Even though it is the ANC who is doing this rather than average South Africans, that is still the government. Those are still the people in charge of the Foreign Relations Department, DIRCO, and ultimately that is who is giving South Africa such a bad reputation. The other thing we need to remember is that South Africa is a country that unfortunately has struggled economically and is facing a rampant crime problem. And so many people in South Africa are viewed with scrutiny when it comes to traveling to different countries around the world. You see, a lot of foreign border security officials will watch to see whether or not a traveler is likely to travel to their country in order to actually resettle there. And there is actually quite a large concern that many South Africans will look to escape the dire conditions in South Africa and resettle in those countries. And so for that reason, they follow very strict protocols when vetting who is actually able to enter the country. And so unfortunately for South Africans, because of the position of the country, they are viewed amongst other developing nations and underdeveloped nations when these countries vet travelers to determine whether or not to grant them access. Unfortunately, so long as the ANC continues on its current foreign policy trajectory and the country doesn't improve economically and in terms of safety, we cannot expect the situation to change. It's only going to be through solid, concrete, sustainable improvements that finally South Africa's passport will be able to improve in strength, and South Africa will once again be able to clean up its image on the world stage. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.